Okay, zooming in today, it's a Sunday, it's the end of June, and here we have an Ed O'Brien signature Strat, and it's made in Mexico, doink. So that gives me immediate terrors, night terrors about the finish on it, but fingers crossed it'll be okay. So what have we here? Well, you can see straight away there's some odd things about this guitar. Well, first of all, Chris has upgraded the bridge for a Wilkinson, more modern looking block. But the original would be a 6-screw, more of a vintage looking Fender thing, and this one has a push-in arm, which makes it a much nicer object. But obvious visual differences is there's no jack plate socket there, and we've got a couple of micro toggles, and of course that's to do with this Fernandez sustainer pickup here, which is a interesting looking beastie. And what does it do? Well, it makes the string note sustain, but it does it by well, it either accentuates the string frequency, it sounds like to me anyway, or a fifth, or a harmonic, or an octave or something. I can't tell you, the specs will probably tell you, but either way it picks up on some part of the frequency and excites it and makes it continue. So you get feedback very quickly, but you get you can also get a long sustained note out of it. And I've never played with one of those before, and so far I haven't really been able to make it do anything sensible much, but I can tell you how it works, only in terms of you've got 3 different selection positions for the way that the sustainer pickup works, and then you've got an on and off, and of course power only goes on once the jack socket is in, so thankfully it won't run out of batteries, hopefully, on its own without being plugged in. So there we have it. It's a beautiful looking cream and parchment type Strat. It's got what's listed in the spec as a V-shaped neck, and I wouldn't call this a V-shape. I don't know. I'm not a massive expert in any of this stuff. I haven't played that many guitars to know, but I've had some V's before, and they were more V-shaped than this. So this is a very deep. I suppose it is V in the sense that it is. I've played sharper V's than this, but it's chunky and it's got a nice deep feel about it. I would have made it a sort of deep D, but they've called it a V anyway. But it's noticeably chunky. That's what's nice about it. So sustainer, control wiring and stuff in there, battery in there, usual cover there. We've got Goto tuners on here. These may also be upgrades, I'm wondering. In fact, these are pretty much exactly the same as the ones I had on something just recently. And you got some sort of special tree of life or something. No, some strange symbol. This meant something. I read it on the marketing and forgot it immediately. So, I suppose the thing that really ought to be done is just to give you a sound of how it plays. Not that I can ever play anything any good about it. For those who mentioned another previous time, said, why don't I clean my windows? And the problem is that this unit was put together from leftover spare parts. Surprise, surprise. And as a result of that, it's kind of got these aluminium double glazing units for glass. So they're filthy on the inside. So there's not a lot we can do really. But it would be lovely to have them clean and to be able to see outside. Now I've just forgotten already what number I had this on. Let's see if I can find it. Okay. Interesting. It wasn't making that noise a minute ago. So in the Strat mode, I'm struck by in the Strat mode with the sustainer turned off. Neck sort of sound. Now if you turn the sustainer on, so you can hear there's obviously you can hear the overdrive feedback thing and the sustain thing kicking in. But what's also important is it makes a huge difference to the tone of the pickups. So there's a real difference. So it takes a lot out of the original Stratty sound, I have to say. So we've got the sustainer as the single coil neck. Then we got middle. Which is quite nice. And then we've got what was a little 59 or a JB Junior, I don't know which one of the two it is, in the bridge. So obviously the feedback goes off when you deaden the strings and stop any vibration. So on. That's in the up position. In the middle position, it seems to be on the same note. So the up position seems to be like an octave, but it seems to accentuate the same note. Middle sounds like the same note again, whether it's the same note, and then the down position is this big whiny harmonic. Well, I am sure you could have fun with that. Now how it does chords with that sort of thing on, so let's try it on the harmonic 50 sort of sounding thing. Off. No. Oh, hang on. Right, back down is off. Let's just tune this a minute because I want to see. Let's see what it does in a bunch of notes together, aka a chord. Interesting. For some reason in the middle pickup it's not going off in this. How weird. That's interesting. What I've noticed, which I don't know what it is, but there's a center detente position on this second tone, which is, oh, it's got a volume on it. Ah, okay. Okay, nice. So that rolls in the amount of this sustain. So we have the sustainer on. Blimey, sharp. That's with it rolled off. Full on. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Come on. Yeah, well. Yeah. Yeah, so it just very subtly rolls the feedback or the sustained harmonic back in. And that's fully off, and that should eventually just disappear, possibly. Ooh, interesting. That's something one would have to play with to figure that out. Well, I mean, I kind of see what it does, but it's one of those wonderful learning curves where to figure out how you'd use it. It takes a better musician than me, but it's a fun device, I guess, for you know, inventing some new stuff, which is what it's all about. Now, of course, what we have is the world's least favourite arrangement. Wah, wah, wah. The covered up truss rod access, and the guess at your adjustment truss rod access. Well, never mind. So let's have just a quick look. What is, if anything, is wrong with this guitar, or what can I do for it? Well, first thing is it was not keeping tune when I got it, and that had a lot to do with the strings not being fully stretched. So Chris, I talked to you on the previous video about that, but yeah, it's one of those things that it's going to be a pain to play. Second thing I noticed is that the tremolo is really bashed in solid, and it's a lot of work to get it to go down, so there's no reason why it shouldn't be a lot lighter than that. What else is there? Yeah, we got some totally choked out stuff going on here, and this is a 9.5 inch radius neck. So although it feels vintage because of the big V-shaped, or the great big rowing boat oar feel up here, which is nice, we are choking out. And what we've got is a funny reversal of things. We've got too much relief, so we've got about 0.4, even 0.5-ish here, which I measured a bit earlier on. That's quite a lot over what we need. Then we've got the high E is 1.4 up here, which is kind of a bit higher than I'd want it, and I'd still want it to be able to play those bends on a 9.5. And the low E is 1.25, which is actually lower than you'd want it anyhow. So I think what we need to do is a few things. We're going to need to adjust the, what do you call it, truss rod, flatten the truss rod out. So that's going to be a take it off, give it a go, put it back on. So I think we need to just do that straight away, because if we don't get that right, then we need to get it right before we do the leveling. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, this would be, hold on a second. Let's see, just bear with me, sorry. I'm going to do something cheeky here, Chris, as I've been doing over the last few days. I'm going to hijack your video and use it for doing an extract or a chunk of the video for the ebook that I'm putting, or writing, or going to be writing. So I'm just getting video segments together. I don't know what the number of this one is, because I haven't got all my information here, but I'm going to call this one, it's going to be, is it new techniques? What I've learned, and maybe it's an A. Let's just put what I've learned section. I'll be back with you. What I've learned, and this is locking tuners, why I hate them. Gosh, sorry. Now this isn't knocking your guitar, Chris. For the sake of it, it's just a general point I want to make. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop and start with these two videos and then get going again. Hold on. Section, what I have learned, locking tuners. So welcome to this quick section about what I have learned over the years about locking tuners. So I may just, I'm hijacking Chris's setup for this purpose. So this guitar has fairly standard, nice quality locking tuners, and they're very attractive because for a lot of people it feels like they make string changing quicker, and the locking tuner mechanism, as you can see here, is a sort of dial arrangement that you push the string through this post at the top, lock off this dial, and get tuning. And a lot of people like them, and a lot of people upgrade to them. Now there's a downside to locking tuners, and we may see it happen any minute now, and if it does happen any minute now, it'll be, you'll see it'll cost us a set of strings. So I'm going to have to carry on as if I'm doing the setup, which of course I am, but I'll talk about it as if I'm looking out for problems with the locking tuners at the same time. So here am I doing a typical setup, and the first thing I want to do is I need to adjust the truss rod, or the relief curve of this neck, and on this guitar it's down here, which means I now need to slack the strings off a little bit. I'll lock them with the, or I'll keep them in one place with the capo, and then I'll take the neck off. I'll make an adjustment to straighten the neck, which I know already I need to straighten it, and then what I'll do is I'll retighten the strings. Now imagine you might be wanting to make a truss rod adjustment at home, so you'd be wanting to do this thing too. So you'd do something very similar. So in this case you would do this too, so you'd put a capo on there. Strings are pretty much floppy, so they're not going to try and pull the neck off. So what I would do at this point is either, I'll do it for quiet's sake, I'll use a hand screwdriver, but you can use a machine one, and if, in fact, I can't lay it down because of the capo. So I'm just going to carefully ease off this. Now some people have said, can't you just take these off partly? and lean the neck forward. No, you can't. You really can't. If you try and lean the neck forward with any of the screws still biting in the wood, you're just going to bend the wood and bend the screws and tear the wood. So that nice sounding idea just does not work. So put it out of your mind immediately. So the way we're going to have to do this for every adjustment of the truss rod, and we might be looking to do 2, 3 at this point in time, because of the placement of the truss rod adjuster, has to be done this way. Thanks, Fender. So again, just hand unscrewing here. Took a walk earlier on. Claire and I went down by the river in Tavistock, and there was some food festival or something, so we were just out for a stroll, and it was kind of raining on and off, summer's rain kind of thing. And we came towards this tree not far from the food vans and all that stuff, and I saw what I thought was a squirrel, and it was, oh, look at that lovely squirrel. And got closer, and it turns out it was a massive great rat. So we had a fun day spending with the rats. So there's the adjuster here, and obviously the strings are now flopping about. Now the great thing is we have to make up, i.e. guess, the adjustment here, which is totally nuts. So how do you guess it? Well, you get your screwdriver, it fits in here, and you go, I need to straighten it, that's clockwise. I think I'm going to do that. Right, totally stab in the dark. And then we gently push it back in there like that. And if I were to zoom out now, which I can do, so lift that up like so, and then we gently lift the thing up together, get our bits ready. I don't know how well that, you can just about see that. And then we go in like so. And because the strings are fairly floppy, they're not pulling this apart. Now, the high likelihood is that because that was a completely random amount of turn, and just based on skill and judgment, which could be completely wrong because I don't know the behavior of this neck and so on and so forth. So it's highly likely that will not be an accurate amount of relief. So I'm going to go from the 0.5 down to about 0.15 or 0.2 maximum. So there's going to be a fair bit of luck if I were to get anywhere close. So as you can see, doing this by hand is a bit slower. One of the things that Fender has done here, and a lot of manufacturers do sometimes, is the hole is slightly smaller than it needs to be in the heel. You really don't need the heel. The pilot hole in the heel doesn't need to touch the threads at all. They need to cleanly, quickly, smoothly go through. So now I'm going to just tighten these up with the neck in place. And there we have it. And now we are back onto re-tightening. So we get our tuning fork. One of the things I forgot to tell you about this, which may suddenly come into play now, is that the first fret actions on this guitar are incredibly wonky. So we had, with the neck curved like it was just before, we had 0.1 on the first fret there, 0.5 on the high E and the B, I mean just all over the place really. So it needs that sorting out as well. So we're going to, thankfully, we're going to replace the nut. But now we're still thinking about locking tuners. Okay, so now we've got this altered, and I'm going to do a quick visual check, and now that's almost flat. And it makes a completely different instrument to play, because the adjustment of the relief really does feel like a big deal. The tiny amounts of difference to the curvature feels very different to the finger. But then it leaves this one almost on the fret and these two much higher. So we've got to do the nut anyway. But we're setting the amount of relief we want in the neck first. So the rule is a little bit more than none, and that is barely a little bit more than none. So if I'm honest, this is the gauge we're using. I'm going to go one more back. You go, what, all of that again? Yes, I'm afraid so. So I'm slacking these strings off. Now, I just realized, I should have looked at this beforehand. This has probably rendered this educational section invalid, because what I was going to say about locking tuners that I don't like, and I think Chris has probably already picked up on that somewhere in the past, and he's probably ahead of the game with this. What I don't like about locking tuners is that because most people push them straight through, clamp them, and then start tuning, you have no backwards undo capacity, because they lock off at the fullest, the most taut point. They crimp they lock by crimping the string, half breaking it, and then typically the first time you come to take them out or undo them, slack them off like we've been doing, they tend to break. And I was expecting, for the purpose of this learning segment, I was expecting them to break while I was doing this, because I knew we'd have at least a couple of ons and offs here to get this relief right, and the damn things haven't broken a string yet. And of course I realised why, and that's because Chris has done what I recommend, which is wind on more. Even though you've got locking tuners, he's wound on some more string to allow us, so that a lot of the weight of the string is taken by the string going around the peg, and B, if we do need to slack it off, and if there is a risk of it breaking, then we can put the string further through to a clean bit of string. And that was the whole point I was going to make, but it's a bit pointless now because I don't think it's going to break to make my point, but any other time it would have done. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this back a tiny fraction. Again, how much? A tiny fraction. How do you know how much of a fraction? You don't. You just guess. Thanks to Fender Mexico or Fender USA, whoever designed this. It's a bit of a silly thing, but it's the way they decided to make it. Actually, I do think it is behind why a lot of people don't make adjustments to the truss rods on this sort of guitar, because, well, frankly, who would want to have to take this all apart? And some people would feel very nervous about doing it because they wouldn't be sure about alignments of the neck and whatever. What else are they upsetting would be a concern. Okay, so that's back on. Everything good. Now I'm going to tighten up again, and maybe it'll break the string now to make my point. Otherwise I'll just ignore this bit, and I'll apologise to Chris for having the segment interrupt your setup. Okay, well that's them done up again and not breaking. So I'll just show you the point I was going to make, just so it doesn't. I could see when I halfway through this, you can see that Chris he's done what most people don't do with locking tuners. He's pushed the wire all the way through with it taut, and then he's pulled it back about a centimetre, as I recommend, and he's locked it off. And then there's a one half to one turn going round there, and that gives him a bit of leeway. It takes the weight off the crushing point, which means it won't break so quickly. And also, if you need to slack it off, it will give you a chance of redoing it. But if you needed now to redo it, rather than clamp back down on the same spot, and I'll give you an example. Let's try and do it with this one. So this is what I'm trying to explain. So if you had to undo this one, take the string off for some reason, the last thing you want to do now is put this string back and crimp it on the same spot. So what you can do now, having built in that little centimetres worth, you can now push it through to a clean bit. And now this time, because we just need to, we've bought ourselves one more lock off like that, and a crimp bit that's weaker. It's stronger obviously on these low strings, but one of these it will be half broken. But you can see that we've given ourselves a new fresh piece of string to cramp on. And that's really useful. And you don't realise you need that until you need it. But Chris has already beat me to it. So I can't really use this. I can use it as a demo of why, but I was hoping to demo it with the string breaking. But I've been foiled. Anyway, so what we've got now is we've got some relief that looks, yeah, it's about a 0.1, 0.2 even. Feels nice, feels nice, feels nice. Don't need to adjust it anymore. So what I'm going to do with that in mind, I'm going to check the alignment down here. That looks good. I'm going to tighten up these now by hand to where I want them to be. It's my handmade torque wrench. So I just know how much I want it to do. And then now we've got the first part of our 3 components set before we do our fret leveling, and the first part is set the neck relief for this gauge of strings that we're using. I think they're 9s, so that's fine. So the next thing we've got is this nut, and this nut is, here we go, look, more undoing. This nut is way too low now, so we have to replace it. It's possible that, you know, if this was your guitar and you hadn't got another nut, you could fill the slots with super glue, and then we could recut the slots as a, you know, medium-term fix, and it does work. I don't know whether it lasts longer or shorter than, you know, whether that material that outlives normal nut material. This does look like it's, I mean, I always say this, but this looks like it's tusk. It looks like it's been added after the effect, but it is yeah, it looks like it's been taken out. It's definitely below the level, so we're going to need to do some work on the nut. Now the first question is, how willing is the nut to come out? And there aren't a lot of ways of finding out. There are tapping it and hoping it moves if it's not too heavily locked in place. That we kind of hope that things move. If it doesn't want to move at all, then we are left with thinking about other options. There we go. That's good. That wanted to come out. That's fine. Yeah, it is a tusk nut, but it's cut wrong, so we can't keep it. That's the thing. So, ta-da! Thankfully, we have a 9.5 here, and the aim, or the challenge, is to get this in and right. Now, it is very, very difficult, and absolutely no criticism of Chris not getting that first fret right, because you can see how big a difference it can be if you don't get the nut, if you don't get the relief where you want it first, and then the last fret action approximately where you want it before you start cutting or trying to fit the nut. So it's very delicate and very sensitive to those adjustments, and of course they interact with each other, those adjustments. So before you know it, you may have got the nut slots where you think you want them, and then suddenly you made an adjustment on the saddle, or you've made it dialed in more relief in the neck or whatever, and suddenly the actions don't feel right. I'm just going to double check this. I mean, this says 9.5 inch radius, but sometimes you never totally trust what people say in their blurb. Yeah, it's not bad. Yeah, good. I mean, there's no reason why they would be lying, but sometimes, for example, I did a setup the other day of a Gibson ES335, and that's supposed to be a 629mm, what's the word, scale length, and in fact it was 625. So the actual neck and guitar were built at least 4mm off their factory notional scale length, which is incredible, really. How can you get away with being that far off the nominal, or shall we say? I mean, the only thing that of course matters is that the neck is built to the actual, oh sorry, the rest of the neck is built to the scale length, you know, in other words, the distance between the 1st and 12th fret is consistent. In other words, if the scale length is actually in real life 625, then that number needs to have been put into the equation in factory, the position where all the frets get put. And if it doesn't, then they don't play in tune. But on this one, it was all in tune. So they've made the neck to 625 in total, which is very weird. But they've done it, and it worked. But you sort of ask yourself, why is that so far? How can that be so far out of the correct scale? Maybe it just wanders over the years. Maybe something in the factory just can't help but get longer over time. Maybe if something wears out, or I don't know. I'm just guessing at that, by the way. So here we have the tab taken off because we've got a curved slot in here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to measure the original thingy's width, and we're going to work towards that. So this is a very measurement sensitive, and I get this wrong all the time. I mean, I'm forever overcutting it, having to put an extra bit on and start again. And there is no shame in this. Sizing a nut and getting it to fit. Am I touching? No, that's the one that came out. Getting a nut, sizing and fitting a nut to land up with 1/10 of a millimeter accuracy is very, very difficult. So we're looking at about, at a squeeze, we're looking at about 305, and this one is 320. So this has to come down. So at this point, we're going to just move a couple of things out of the way because we're going to need some sanding room. Sandy. So I've got some new bits of stuff prepared already. Ooh, look at that. So we can work off this new stuff first. Take off the little burr on the end. So from 320 down to 305, something like that. I've also got new wet and dry paper on my banana leveling file for today. I put all that on yesterday. I felt so prepared. 308, 314, the bass end a little bit thicker. And this sort of level, you can then try and get it, that's almost a fit. It's just got a tiny little bit of stickiness. So at this point we can just very lightly hone it down. So we're doing it bit by bit. So we're doing the relief curve first. We're doing getting the nut into place second. So that's just about nearly, is actually a good fit. Yep. Sometimes when you put them in, they just sort of rock over the center, but that's just about right. Now this is technically a microfraction long, and actually, if anything, we probably want, if I can get it out now, we probably want, come along, okay, doesn't want to play, we probably want a bit more room, if anything, on the treble. So if we're going to take any off, I'm going to err on the side of running it flush at the treble end to begin with, and then seeing where the bass string falls. So it gives me a sort of hint at how much to take off the bass side. So again, this is a sort of touch it and feel it sort of approach. So once we get the nut to the right size, what we'll do is we'll check the action at the other end, then we'll fine tune to get the first fret action. So it's a sort of it's a careful arriving at working our way towards the target action. Now of course once we've got the target action, we don't expect the strings necessarily to play at all without buzzing and choking, because we've made changes, and the idea of this setup is that we tell the guitar how we want it, i.e. we choose the action and so on, and then we level it into submission is a kind of way to describe it, one way to describe it. So we're nearly sort of there to begin with. I've got a bit overhanging at the bottom here, but that's just to make a note to myself on that. Let's get this one tightened down. Now what we don't know is how much is now sticking up, i.e. the clearance we've got, but it could be, if we're lucky, this could be a drop-in, perfect drop-in, which would be great without any up and down adjustment. It's looking close to that. That would be a treat instead of this endless working. I think my choice about the position of the nut with a little bit more action over this side, I think that's good. So I think I will probably take the extra bit off this end when the time is right. Now let's just tighten this up a bit. We'll get it, oops, that's just sitting a tiny bit up. Now, is that overhanging or is that actually sitting up? That could be sitting up, so it may be. Right, before I tighten this up, I'm going to just go back and have a look at this, because this is quite difficult. What you don't know is the exact radius of the curve inside here. We hope it's a perfect 9.5, but any tiny difference between their 9.5 and the one on my machine, or the one on the thing that I'm going to use to just flatten and check the radius at the bottom of this nut, any difference at all, and we'll have a tiny bit of rocking going on. It's just the way it is. There's so many potential differences in the quote-unquote 9.5s being used. So what I'll do is I'll get me a special machines made quite a long time ago now by Bob. Very kindly made these devices for radiusing nuts. Now they come with little holders. Now this that's interesting, because this radius on Bob's machine actually doesn't tally quite exactly with this thing. So what I'm not 100% clear on is which of these things is the actual radius. So I don't want to be using that thing if it's going to put the wrong radius on it. It's not that easy to guesstimate here. One of the ways I've done it before is when it's really, I'm not being sure at all. Yeah, this looks quite different. It's interesting. I think this is one of the reasons why I didn't use this before. This is actually just different enough that I'm not going to work with it. You know, if we're desperate to check this out, we can do a comparison with a bit of paper. So if we use the existing one to draw a radius curve, and we use this one to check against it, the good thing is, if I can get it, yeah, that's about the same. So they are very close, but I'm not entirely sure whether this is dead. Where does a little tiny lump in the middle holding this back up, because that's what you can get. When you take that little tab off, it's quite difficult to get it off completely smoothly. There's a little bit of a lump still in there, and then of course in taking it off like this you can upset the whole thing even worse. So I'm just trying to keep this as smooth as possible. Right, so yeah, that's Bob, if you're watching. That's why I didn't continue using those, because the 9.5 was not didn't seem to line up accurately with the 9.5s that I had and the guitars had, so it might well be worth checking the accuracy of those. Sorry, I've forgotten why it was that the main issue I found with it, and that was it. So it'd be very well worth double checking the accuracy of your printing of the radius blocks. Sorry, it was so late, that piece of feedback, but now I've only just realised what it was. Okay, so that's almost there, that's almost there. Do a tiny bit on this end. Well, what a day that was yesterday. Oh my lordy. I cancelled coming to the workshop yesterday because of this. I was so tied to keeping track of the news in Russia, what was going on with Prigozhin and his Wagner soldiers and their so-called march on Moscow, which turned out not to be a march on Moscow. Well, it was, and then it suddenly became a, yeah, that's a good deal, I'll take that, and I'll sort off to Belarus, which was a very peculiar end to some global political stagemanship. Okay, so I'm going to tighten these up and see if we've got this sitting flat. The thing is, it will work even if there's a tiny mismatch at the other side, but it's very sensitive. If you don't get this radius exactly matching the one on the guitar, it will rock slightly, and you can end up with just that little gap at one side, somehow just feeling a bit horrible, because you want it to be perfectly seated. Can that just stay in there, please? Thank you. What's happened here? Has this gone for a walk? It has, hasn't it? I can't really find the locking bit on here. What's up, man? There, that's got to be it. Yes, what a day. I thought it was going to end up in Moscow with a handover or coup of some sort, but amazingly, it didn't. Right, so I'm hearing a little push down there, and that's now seated. See, with any of these, if you glue them down and they don't seat perfectly, you might as well not have bothered, which is such a pain. Okay, that's fit. We're pressed down on both sides, so that little adjustment was great. Just what we needed. Oh yeah. Now we've got what I think is pretty good action here. It's probably 0. Where's my gauge? It's about 0.4, I would say. Might be a fraction over how I'd like it. The problem there now is that, yeah, it's on the upper limit of what I like, and that's okay. The reason I'm cautious about this is I don't really have because I don't trust this 9.5, and I have to do something about that, because there's no point having it if I can't use it. Or I'll have to have something else. You can make your own. You make your own block with 9.5 radius and put, from plywood. It's kind of hard to make it dead accurate, because if you're cutting it with things like that thing, no, not jigsaw, a bandsaw and stuff, it isn't easy. The alternative is to cut down, and I try so hard to avoid doing that. So this is actually pretty good. I mean, it's not bad at all. 0.1 of a millimeter, I'm going to forgive it, and rather than try and shape this any further, I'm going to leave it as is. And it's seated almost perfectly. Maybe a tiny whiff of the sandpaper later on that side. Okay, so now I've got my nut in place. I'm just going to double check the action and make a couple of tweaks at this end, because what I want is the correct target action at this end. Then we've got the three main components right, which is the last fret action, the first fret action, and the neck relief. And then we're ready to do any leveling. Now, first of all, this is now low, and those are UK metric, which surprises me. So this I want to lift up slightly, so I'm going to, of course they're metric because they're Wilkinson. Samuel, come along now. Okay, that's about 1.5 there. It's too low. Now these are standing quite tall on their hind legs, these saddles, and one of the decisions sometimes you might make is, if you don't like them being so high up on their hind legs, you may find that your only option is to shim the neck a tiny bit, which, you know, is not to everyone's taste. There are lots of I don't know what the word is, old wives' tales about why you should, shouldn't, or so on, do that. I don't actually think there's any problem with it at all, considering that Fender had its own micro tilt adjustment system anyway, which was effectively a shim. It was just a pusher, a little screw pushing against, or a little pin point pushing against, screw head pushing against a plate on the heel, which allowed it to push it up and get the angle of the neck where you want it, so that it aligns to the bridge better. Okay, so now this is pretty good where it is. So I'm just going to look down here and get a bit of grab hold of this. So that was 1.4 now then, but it's down a bit now, which is good. That looks about right. Right, up a tiny bit. Some creature loose in here. And now checking across here to look at the sort of spread of the strings visually, which is often the way I prefer to do it, so I see what I'm doing better. Don't make that a giant wasp. How did you get in here with the window shut? Feels very good. Now, we're still joking out. So let's make a note of this, because it's very good to be able to track what we do here. So the, what do we call this? 12th, 13th fret, high E bend, chokes out. 14th fret, chokes out, not surprisingly. 15th, chokes out. 16th, 17th, 18th, 18th. So 16th, 17th and 18th all choke out. That whole list of strings down there choke out. So we've got to aim to free that. That's the whole purpose of this. So that's fret slap, you can hear. Fret slap down on the low E. So quite a lot of slap on the E string, and a little on the A, not so much, what you kind of expect. Okay, so what you'd expect really, slap as you go into the big windy wound strings spinning about. So we're nearly there. I think I need to open this window, try and get this B outside. Come on, out you go, dusty bee. Go on. Let's find something. Help him out. Come on, you've been indoors too long. You're totally dusty. Hey, go and enjoy the world. Hurrah. They should. It should. Oh, that's quite windy. We get a breeze in here. That's nice. Whew, right. Next thing we do. Yes, we de-string it one more time. So again, if Chris hadn't put these little extra winds on, we would have lost a string by now, and I would be now looking for a packet of cheap strings to bust open to find a replacement, and that's an absolute pain, really. You know, you don't want to be doing that. You don't want to be doing it for other people's guitars, and you don't want to be doing it for your own, because it's going to cost you one way or another. So having done this extra little wind on, we've got much more, I've got longer life of undoing the strings like this. So when I come to put them on, I'll do them again like Chris has done, which is the extra centimetre or so of string around the post. I know it sort of, people go, well, that defeats the whole point of having a locking tuner, and okay, maybe if you do it, use it, and you cope with the broken strings. That's up to you. The other thing, of course, is that locking tuners gives a false sense of security, because I know a lot of people who reach for locking tuners to cure tuning instability, and as you know from my videos before, the tuners, I will tell you, have nothing to do with tuning stability or instability. It's entirely to do with the quality of your nut and the slots, and to do with the amount of slack that has been left in your strings unstretched. By the way, I'm seeing these frets have been leveled at some point. Just up close, little signs of it. But anyway, so now we've got these marked up. We're getting ready in very close proximity to doing the leveling, and we've got our sort of targets now in mind, which is we've got some bends, so there's something getting in the way of the high E bending, even, down at the target action that we want, which again, it's within a totally realistic target, and this is one of those things you can't know until you've had the experience, and but on a 9.5 inch radius, 1.2 on the high E last fret and 1.5 on the low E last fret. Those are perfectly doable, achievable targets to aim for. I mean, they're the limit of how low. So by that I mean you should be more surprised if you can't get that than if you can. Now sometimes, occasionally, you can't get there. Whoa! See what I've just done? I've just pulled this, and now it's started to break the string. Ugh. So the crimping, see that? The crimping has broken the string. That's it. I'm not doing any more pulling, because that's just going to break off. We don't need it to do anything other than just stay there right now. Sorry, I just hit the thing. Yeah, we just need it to stay there and behave. But yes, it's that is one of the reasons I hate. Good illustration. I hate doing that because I hate it crimping the string like that, because you come to stretch it, which you need to if you're going to have it play and stay in tune, and guess what? It goes and busts because it's already partly damaged. So here we go. We are now getting ready to level with a brand spanking new, fresh 400 grit doofer thingy, banana. A viewer made a couple of comments. We had to disagree with each other, but he made a couple of comments earlier in the week or something, saying, you know, being complimentary, saying, you know, you're obviously good at what you do, but, and then he proceeded to tell me that this method, and it's very specific, he said this method stores up more trouble for the future. Oh, God. I hate this thing, it's coming undone from here. Oh, I'll just leave it there. And I don't mind people finding criticisms of this method, but I really want them to, if they make a statement like that, then you will expect me to say, what problems, and can you give me any examples and tell me what's your hypothesis about how they happen, or, you know, what is it about this method that causes those things, and why, and what evidence have you, you know, when have you seen this happen and why, and so on. So you make a claim, like all those claims, and you can see straight away where a big problem is. Unfortunately, that's interesting because it doesn't really, this bit at this point in time doesn't cater for the bits up here that are choking out the bends, but you can see straight away on this neck under compression. Let's see if you can see it from here. Yeah, I mean, you know, yeah, you can see that's clearly a high area. So we've got, I would call that normal, this whole area. So that's flat, that's high, all the way up to about here. And then we're back to kind of a little bit low and then normal. So this end, it's not a bad neck, but it's got clearly one area that's higher. And now what's interesting about this method, which you've probably heard me talk about before, but this method is leveling the frets under compression. So this is with the neck in its default position when it's got string loading on it and it's compressing it from end to end. And if you level it without that compression and the string loading, so it's not just the curvature, but if you level it without the compression in it, when you finish your leveling and it's all nice and level according to your clicky thing, your fret rocker, and then you put strings on it and do them up to pitch, you've introduced this compression and it bunches the frets slightly different. That's fine. So that what you're seeing right there, if this guitar has been leveled before, what you're maybe seeing there is my method picking out the difference that their method of passive leveling with a neck flat didn't pick up, or you know, they did it flat and then I'm doing it with the compression at play, and lo and behold you get a different set of fret positions with it under compression, and it is enough to make that difference. It's amazing how it can actually make a tangible difference. So this is really telling us where the high spot is, right? I mean, there's a high spot. It's high, low. Now I'm seeing higher, lower, very higher, okay, lower, higher. So we've got 1, 2, 3 peaks here, and we've got a small down there and a small down right there. Now the small down here, the lower bit here, could well be to do with why a combination of a low spot here in the G area and a high set of high frets there is why this set are choking out. And that's what's fantastic about this method, is you can see it, and it'll tell you as you go through it with the leveling beam. It'll tell you what the state of the neck is. Anyway, so getting back to my whinge, This person who, you know, was willing to, you know, talk and discuss to a point, I kind of, my first reply wasn't massively friendly, because I am bored of people turning up, pronouncing I'm doing it wrong, telling me that I'm doing it wrong, but never articulating why. So they, you know, they think that it's somehow it's good enough just to pronounce like the mighty expert. You're doing it wrong. It'll create all kinds of problems, and you're an idiot. And that's all they really want to get to say. They don't want to share their view. And of course, they don't want to share their view, because the truth is, they may not even know this, but the truth is, if they did share their view, they stand a real risk of it being argued into the ground. Because the truth, as you know, whether you like it or not, I've been doing this for 8 years non-stop, and in all that time I've been using this method. There's some high frets right in the middle of the G. Now that's interesting. That area here wasn't high at all in the edge here, right? But now they're all showing up as high. Look at how dirty that is. So we've got these highs that we saw before, and these now are high in the middle, whereas they weren't particularly, in fact they were barely high at the edge there at all. So this is the congesting bit that's causing that, plus the low spot there. Low spot plus high spot over here, all of that will be choking out. And the proof of this pudding, and if you ever wanted to argue to somebody why it works, send them to this video, because in a minute I guarantee you, I bet, really will I really bet, I'll wager my life on it that this will play and I'll be able to bend those notes. So what did we say? 13th. 14th, 15th, 16th. I'm going to do a little bit more in this G track, but you can hear that we've got most of them out. Not all of them yet, but most of them are soothed. So that is the proof of this method. Right? You didn't have those notes before, and now I'm going to just run this last G track section again, and I'm not only removing the high spots on this G track, on all of the frets in this G track. What I'm looking to do is I'm looking to bring them down just in line slightly with the low spot just before, because it's the low spots on your neck that will dictate almost more than the high spots will, because a low spot makes an ordinary not high fret effectively high. So let's try. We have the 13th, now let's just see. 14th is going there, so 14th, that's over the hill, so up to the dead center. Okay, so it's just going over the hill. I'm going to do a tiny bit more, and then that will be it for this line, because we are very low anyway, as always, but I'll do a tiny bit more at this end here. So I'm going to just push it a bit into the the D track a minute. Okay. Yeah, so we've got most of those notes freed up, and if there are any that don't quite, I mean, the problem is none of them can make it over the top of the hill, i.e. the middle of this fingerboard, which is between the G and the D, because you're doing negative. You're doing negative geometry coming back down the side of a hill on the opposite side. We're actually on 1 millimeter there, so we need this to be a fraction higher. 1.2 this is meant to be. There we go. Let's see, 1.2. So this one here, is choking out on this D track. So I'm just going to calibrate the D track and pay a little bit of attention when we get there, but we're almost there on everything, which is amazing. So that's the benefit of this method. You aren't actually able to do that with any other leveling method, which I think is incredible. You can just level until you've cleared up the notes you want to clear. So there's no blind hoping, just scraping away at frets, hoping that you get where you want to go. This is, you know, you can check, you can interrogate it at every step. So I'm going to now hope that this last little bit, as we come over the hill on the D, is just going to free up that last little bit of choke over on this high E as it comes across the G track. And you know, we know we're taking material out of the middle of the frets here, because we know that that section is suddenly high compared to the edges, and that's just how they've been laid. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but I bet you that's as good as we're going to get on a 1.2mm action. So now the interesting bit now is we're leveling now, same procedure, but we're leveling now for fret slap. We're not really thinking of individual high and low frets. We're looking out for this general slap buzz that accompanies all the notes on or great chunks of the neck, like sometimes halfway, as much as halfway or more on the neck. And that's why I call it slap. And it's not to invent a cute term for the sake of it. I'm not trying to add something to the dictionary. It's just for the purpose of differentiating it between fret buzz, which is caused one way, and fret slap, which is caused by another thing. And the fret slap is caused by the spinning strings, which are usually the bigger, fatter the strings, the wound strings spin more. And they get to a point where they run out of, or their spinning room is interrupted by the high points here, here, and here, and they get clipped. And so high points in the middle here will be catching the strings pretty much all the way up the A and E. And what I then do at this point is I try and lay off the force and just allow the default curve of this rod to work on these frets, and I can feel straight away that it's working primarily in the middle here, and that's because we know this is an unusually high spot, and this will be what's creating the bulk of the fret slap, these high frets in the middle. Actually, I call them high frets, but they're high because the neck is bunched at that point, not in a way that you can see it visually, but it certainly is. Much better. Not this. Do a tiny bit more down either end, and then we'll move on to the E. Now there's somebody in YouTube, I haven't got back to him on this, but somebody asked a really good question about the geometry of all of this, and it was such a good question that it made my head hurt a bit, and I had to sort of go away and lie down, sort of thing. And I thought, that's great. You know, some people have accused me of not wanting to argue a point or be proven wrong or something, and I don't mind at all. And that was a great example of it. Somebody asking in a way that wasn't just trying to grandstand and be right. It was to raise an issue that was, ooh, blimey, yeah. So I have that in the back of my mind to come back to that question. But their question was, if you've made a... Their question went something like this, and I can get why they were saying it. They said, if you're telling me that there's this bumpy thing called the neck, and if you're telling me you've got a smooth curved thing called the thing, and they said, if you're just taking that backwards and forwards, aren't you just scraping everything down? And in a way, I'm saying what you're doing is more that than that. And I can't prove it, and actually I don't even know if it's necessary to prove it, because I know that however we conceptualize it, it seems to be doing what it needs to do, which yeah, it seems to be doing what it needs to do. And I think some of the times the problem about it is only in trying to explain it insofar as it needs explaining, if it does at all. But you know, yes, it's because I think the guy's suggestion was, why don't you do it like that? And I suppose, yes, I could literally go and that would probably, you know, and if you notice when I do it, I do tend to go from side to side as much as, you know, I don't go huge mile-long stripes. I tend to keep it to about, what am I doing here, about 2 centimeters worth, and then I do go from side to side. So it's a combination of both those things. So good challenging question, because I don't really know how to answer it. All I know is that it seems to work, and therefore, not being a complete idiot, I continue to do it. So much better. Tiny little bit down in this first half, but that's much better than it was, and a ton better than many other such necks I have worked on. So when I work on this, what I call fret slap, I am trying to use as little down force as possible, and just allowing the shape of the bar to, as I call it, impose itself onto the underlying hills and valleys, with the idea that with a bit of luck it sort of just evens out and takes the top of their hills off. Now for a newcomer, of course the biggest scare of all of this is when do I stop, and when have I gone beyond a good point. Okay, I'm happy where I've got to with that, and again that's a lot to do with experience, being able to say, yep, that's a good place to have reached. You know, it's probably 90% better than it was before I did that, if not 95. It's a good chunk better. Now at this point I can remove the, how are we doing? What are we doing for time wise? 1 hour, look at that. Going to take the strings off now. That one was breaking. Luckily the central core was strong enough to hold it. I'm just going to take the strings off, and then it will be a case of recrowning the frets. And this is where I have to just pray. In the past I've had a couple of Mexico. There's a bit splitting there. Is that splitting on the tuners where they've gone in? Yeah, there is a bit of split in the wood there. Like the tuner's been, oh, this splitting finished. That tuner's been bashed in. I'm going to take a picture of that. Did you know that, Chris? There's let's get the light in the right place. Sorry. Look at that. See the cracked finish around that one? So there's the crack there. See it in the light? That's the finish cracking, but it's cracked all around here because that's been clamped on too hard or something like that, over tightened or something. But no, you know what's happened? It's done that when the ferrule has been banged in. Oh, Chris, you changed them, didn't you? Thank you. Sorry. Right. Okay. There's my detective. I found the culprit, and it was you. Sorry. Yes, I get it. It happens. I'm not knocking you. I'm not finding fault. I'm just being Columbo because I can't help it. Anyway, Right, so we are, and a bit more on that one there. So yeah, it's very and that one. That's very difficult when you bang in those tuner ferrules. Yeah, the Fender finish can be very cracky. Oh God, please don't make it come off when I'm doing the fret cleaning, finishing, polishing, crowning, whatevering. Right, let's take off these. Oh, I forgot to do something, but I'll do that afterwards. Right, so one of the things I was going to do was to change the just the pressure of the springs on the tremolo, just so it wasn't as harsh a thing as it currently is to move it. There's no reason it needs to be. It can be set to just be very light touch without being any tuning instability or anything that sometimes maybe people are worried about. But I will come back to that. So here we are, sacrificial strings done their good service. Off they come, and you can see the frets look kind of lots of fret dust and stuff in the way. So it's a sort of scary look for the time being. Oh, typical, I knew I was missing one string. Come on, that should come. Come on. Thank you. Yes, so we'll clean those up as we go, and then I will mask off the neck. Fingers crossed that all that finish stays on, and we haven't got one of those models from the batch. And I think it was a particular era in the Mexico factory where it just everything fell off. And I've had a couple where I've had to refinish the necks completely. There's no way to avoid it, unfortunately. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mark up over the frets again, and this is now to do the recrowning. Of course, Chris, here's me talking about the scale length, and it was Chris's 339. The scale length was bizarrely wrong or out of its normal. It was actually 625 when it should have been 629. But because they made the neck with that slightly shorter scale in mind, I don't know how they chose it to do it that scale, but because the neck was made in accordance with that, the guitar plays fine. You know, it doesn't really feel any different for that 4mm overall change in length, but it does seem weird. Anyway, sorry, that was Chris's 335. Right, so here we go. Let's work these frets, and so the idea of this crowning file is to reshape the fret that we've leveled or flattened slightly, and whilst chasing the levelness, we have a chance to reshape it into a kind of arch shape rather than a flattened arch. So that's what we're doing here, and as long as we do it whilst leaving the marker pen untouched on the top of the fret, more or less, it means we've reshaped it without lowering or changing the relative height of it relative to the other frets. And even though now, if you did a fret rocker now, you'd find them out of, they would still be click, and that sometimes, I think, may have sometimes confused people because we're not leveling it with the strings off. We wanted it level. This method levels it with the strings on like you were playing it. There's no point having it level with the strings off if the relative positions of the frets change once you put the strings on and put it under load. So this method is unique in that it does level with that compression and that loading at play. Now, some luthiers I've seen around the world use jigs and stuff to recreate the curvature, but even then they don't level with the curvature. They do lots of other things with the curvature as if getting the curvature in was important, but actually the curvature is less important to the leveling aspect as is the compression. It's the compression that makes the most difference to the relative seating of the frets. Anyway, that's just my findings over 8 years of doing this every single day of the year for 8 years. Okay, and I'm not going to apologise for having that wealth of experience. And the feedback I've had this week from various customers has been absolutely amazing, heart touching the heart, some of it, so I'm not going to apologize for having learned what I've learned or built up the experience I've built up. There comes a time when you've earned the right to be confident in the process you use because you've seen it produce results, the desired results, enough times. And I think maybe it looks arrogant to somebody who comes in off the street and goes, "Hey mate, you're doing that wrong. Look at any luthier. Any luthier will tell you do it with the neck off." And that's all they know, and they make their they make their claim and they clear off. And it's very difficult for them to understand that my lived experience proves otherwise, and therefore, why wouldn't I follow that? And I try to be as polite as I can, and I say, if you don't mind, I will let my customers' feedback guide me on how what I do in my business. If I hope you don't think that's a silly decision, but I don't care if you do, but you may not be surprised. And if they are surprised, then they're kind of a bit dopey, because they obviously don't do this or haven't done this as a business, because your customers need to feel that what you've done is right for them, and it doesn't matter what anyone else says if that's what they feel. It was a good example of that a few years ago, or many years ago when I first started. There was a guy, he tended to sort of spot sellers on YouTube, eBay, and I was doing a lot of eBay, well, not a lot, I was doing eBay selling, because I'd buy a guitar, set it up, learn while I was setting it up, video it, and then I'd end up selling it on for just a little more than I paid for it, just to get the materials back and get a little bit from my learning. And along the way, you tend to notice other people doing similar types of things on YouTube. And one of the people I noticed on YouTube was a guy called Mark Phillips. And it so happened that I had started getting requests for extra ultra-wide 6 strings, because there were only, at the time, and still is, there were only a limited number of commercial options available to anybody who's got really huge hands and needs a much, much wider guitar than is conventional. So, I kind of noticed Mark because he was doing those things, and he was a decent guy. You could tell straight away. He was very open and honest about his situation, and it's clear that many years ago, he'd had a brain injury from a car accident. So he in some ways, he struck me as being quite a vulnerable guy, and I'd say it to his face, and I don't think he would probably disagree. He's very clear about, or open about, his brain injury. And you could see this was a decent guy, loving fiddling with guitars, and experimenting with things and making some money, and selling some guitars that he had converted and done strange things too. And interestingly, even though some of his stuff looked monstrous, quote unquote, to the average aesthetic eye, and people, as soon as somebody does something like that, you get loads of forums going, "Have you seen that bloke? What a moron!" And everyone gets on the case. Nobody stops to think this might be a vulnerable individual who doesn't need your, criticism and so on and so forth. Anyway, poor old Mark got infamous for his conversions, well, all kinds of things, but a lot of it was for these 7 to 6 string conversions, because he didn't. What I did is I found a kind of more radical solution with completely different bridges and bridges you could set the width sideways, alter the sideways width, and I could do conversions that way, and it cost more and so on. But Mark had done it by taking the original 7 string bridge and basically sort of cutting some new notches in the strangest of places, so that he's succeeded in spacing those new 6 strings equally across the neck, but it wasn't a pretty way of doing it for sure. And of course that then caught the eye of people in the forums, and they all piled into it, and they'd all have a good old smirk at him, and then poor old Mark, I think he couldn't resist turning up at these forums and defending himself, which was not a good thing to do, I think, and I certainly wouldn't do it. But he did, and so he would get sort of drawn into these unpleasant, unkind piss takes, shall we say, and a lot of very compassion-free people kind of scoring points on him and feeling good by criticising him, and it was very horrible to see. And anyway, the point about him was, and I've talked to him quite a few times, and he's a genuinely nice guy. He does things differently from how I would do it. But one thing that's true about him is, if you look at his eBay feedback for all of the monstrous weirdo guitars that he's sold, all of his customer feedback is thrilled and happy beyond belief, right? So you can see guitars that perhaps you or I would look at and go, oh my God, what a monstrosity, what a butcher's job, as people would call it. He's butchered this guitar, and how dare he ask £600 for that, or whatever. But you know what? They would sell for whatever suited him, and his customers would be genuinely thrilled, and you'd see that feedback. Now that, to me, was a really important lesson, because it doesn't matter what all these snobby, arsey, clever people, aesthetic snobs were saying. This guy was able to give customers who paid him money something they really wanted, and whether they liked it or not, and of course they didn't like it, his customers were genuinely happy with what he had done for them, and these critical people were miserable with that, because that's not dirty. Is there no paper on there to clean it up? Remove it. Anyway, yeah, so they hated the fact that he had actually got happy customers, because they wanted him to be obviously a failure because of the way he did things, and it was not the way they'd do things, and so on. So that was a really good lesson, that ultimately, if your customers are happy, it doesn't matter 2 hoots what other people think of you when it comes down to what you're doing in business, because if you can please customers, then that's all there is to it. And now I think I don't know whether Mark struggled onwards, because I would say partly because the buy, modify and sell on businesses, there's some grunge on here, I don't know what it is. It's not an easy business to make money in, full stop. So I think he struggled a bit over the last couple of years as the market's been not so good. But in terms of pleasing his customers, he had a perfectly good approach to doing that, and long may he carry on, I would say. But it's such a shame that people would be so unkind about it. But anyway, that was my morality story, just about the when people arrive and tell you how crap it is the way you do what you do, and it always amazes me that they think you're going to discount the evidence of your own eyes and ears and experience. Like customers are really happy with how this guitar played, and so on and so forth. Oh, and look, I even pointed one of these guys who told me I was doing it all wrong. I pointed it to, I think it might have been Chris's feedback. I think it might have been criticism on the 335 or something about it. And I said, look, here's the actual customer's feedback on the same YouTube page practically, and it didn't make any difference to them at all. They didn't go, oh, do you know what? I'm sorry. It's clear the customer was happy with what you did, and nothing like that. They still insist they're right, and how you're doing it is wrong. Dogma. I know you've heard me whinge about this enough times in the past, I know, so I apologise a bit. Okay, right, so we have time now to mask this off for the process of cleaning, sanding and polishing the thing. So this is very tight. Do you know what? I don't think I'm going to glue this in. I'm going to take the chance of not gluing it in, because I don't want to if I don't have to. Perfectly placed on that side. Hold on. Yes, it's perfectly fitted, and there's no reason. There is no reason to glue it in if it stays in place. Glue should only be to make it if it's needed to keep it in place. Otherwise, it just makes it harder for future changes and so on. So it doesn't need it. I ain't going to do it. That's in perfect position. It's going to stay there and do its job. And that's the ideal target, isn't it? So you don't have to use glue if you can get it tight enough. But the amazing thing about working on a nut like that is one swish of the sandpaper and you can be over the line. Now, I didn't question this with Chris, but I would have put a string tree on there, and I'm going to do it, and because I know that Chris wants the best of the best, and if he doesn't like it, I'll take it off at home before I send it and we'll adjust the invoice. But why not? We have and what I'll do is I'll just very slightly enlarge the hole, because we also don't want, what don't we want? We don't want anything. Yes, Sam, come on, what don't we want? We don't want any splitting finish, because we've seen what happens with splitting finish. So yeah, the next bit now will be mask off all of this fingerboard, which will take a little while. And then polish it, sand and polish it out, and then it will be putting strings on and stretching them out and just tweaking the truss rod. So we'll see how we're doing. 1 hour 20 minutes. So I did some of the, it's quite quick because I did some of the checking and measuring and stuff before we even got going, and I did my preparation of my tools before I got going as well, i.e. namely yesterday. So this tusk string tree, if you're going to have tusk nut for the basic benefit to the tuning stability, then that's why I highly recommend a tusk string tree to go with it. There's no reason why not to. Okay, so this is the scary bit for me, and I'll get going and then I'll stop shortly afterwards. But putting this on, if there's any problem with the adhesion of this blasted finish on this guitar, then we're done for. I can't really actually funnily enough, I've seen so many people polishing frets and polishing over the raw fingerboard, mostly I have to say on kind of rosewoody coloured fingerboards, but you know, it doesn't seem that, or it seems like a lot of people don't bother masking off the fingerboard. And I know that you could wire wool and it doesn't really do much terrible to you. I mean, this isn't really glossy. This is already being slightly wire wooled by the looks of it. And I suspect that might have been a Chris treatment, although I wouldn't say for sure. But so, you know, if you kind of went over all of this with wire wool after you've done all the sanding. But the truth is, I'm going from 400 grit which would really scuff this up, and I'd have to include all of the fingerboard with the progressive grit stages and so on. So I really wouldn't want to not protect the fingerboard like this. And of course with that comes a risk that if it's going to be a batch with that adhesion problem, then there's nothing we can do about it because it's going to lift up. Every time it doesn't come off, I'm very happy, and so we just have to cross our fingers. And like I said, in the past when it's happened, I've just refinished the whole neck. Usually, that's fine. So you just leave that bit untouched. Right. So I'm going to get off for a second. He keeps saying, and then I'm going to do some recharging. What I did with the headphone mic is I decided to, from now on, switch all the phone. Oh damn! I didn't switch my iPhone to airplane mode. I switched everything else Bluetooth off, and that was the idea. Is to I think I was getting interference between my Hawaii phone with its Bluetooth and possibly the fact that I might be getting better signal. Before I didn't have any signal, hardly any signal coverage on the iPhone, and I think that stopped it interfering with this headset unit, whereas now it could be improved signal to the region, the area, has possibly caused it to do the Pearl and Dean of mobiles, which sounds horrible, and I've had to edit out a few times, but so far it seems like I've got away with it on the last couple of ones. But it's a pain because when I go off now to do the polishing out, it's nice to be able to put on a video and listen to that. So I'll do that now. See you again shortly. Well, here we are, post recrowning, sanding, polishing out, and we're ready to get some strings in there and do the final bits of stretching out, setting up the tremolo, or intonating, setting up the tremolo. So let's get. I've just been watching old episodes of Rising Damp from the 70s, and I just watched the episode where Rigsby finally asks Miss Jones to marry him, and she says yes, and then it all goes terribly wrong, and he gets lost and doesn't make the church, and anyway she comes in apologising. They don't know it, that she didn't make it because she cried off and decided she couldn't do it, and so for a moment he sort of let her off, and she was so pleased that she was willing to go off with him to still take advantage of the honeymoon hotel, and she was about to go with him, and then just as they were going to have some good times, even if they weren't married, the last little twist comes in, and it goes, his brother turns up and lets Miss Jones know that they didn't even get there, and she was so outraged that even though she didn't want to marry him, he couldn't be bothered to get to the church on time, or he wasn't able to get to the church on time. So he lost even his chance of a dirty weekend in Bognor Regis or wherever they were going to spend their so-called honeymoon. It's just hilarious, really. Poor fella. I was so upset because I thought he was going to get a chance of happiness for once in his poor life. Poor man. Anyway, classic comedy. They'd never allow someone to be too happy. Okay, so they did a similar thing, remember, with The Office, when Tim and Thingy finally got together. What was her name? Dawn. Tim and Dawn. Yes. Anyway, so it's always a classic. The comedy writer knows that you want this happy ending and they don't give it to you. Anyway, so I'm pulling through tight all the way through and then back about a centimetre, I'm locking it off, but not so hard that it, you know, it crushes it completely. Now people say, well, you shouldn't crush it so hard if you don't want it to break. And how the hell do you know how hard to do it? Because there's no measurement and there's no way of knowing. So you do it a certain amount and you think you've done it enough. Anyway, so the good thing is if you do use the extra centimetre wind on, as I'm doing here, you can do it quite a bit less harsh in the clamping than if you weren't putting that extra wrap on it, which is the way to do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to put on these strings. Where am I? Where have I gone? Put these strings on, stretch them out thoroughly, and then intonate the bridge, and then just set it for a down only tremolo movement, which is where it's at currently, but we can lighten it up so it's a bit nicer to use. Right. Okay, so oops, what am I doing that for? I'm going to go over there. No, I'm going to go under there. Under there. Come here. Okay, so those have all gone round a bit, and we can snip them all off nice and flush to the post, so nobody gets any spike finger. So what I've been reading these last few days again, Clockwork Orange by, is it William Burgess? William Burgess. Absolutely brilliant. Brilliant book. I love the language in it. All this kind of strange Russian nadsat, what was it called it? Nadsat, or something like that. I invented a kind of a language, a future language for this era that this was set in. So once I put the strings on, I just give them a sort of pulling up bed in, just to make sure they're seated properly. And then we'll get the first tuning up with the tuning fork, and then we'll do some stretching. Whoop, that one wasn't seated quite properly down, but that's okay. So, yes, a Clockwork Orange, what a great story. It's one of those things that every time I read it, I want to watch the film. Nice. Okay, stretch, thumb and forefinger, stretch, thumb and forefinger. And basically, you've got to be doing it until there's no more detuning. Once you've done it, until there's no more detuning, then you're ready to do the tremolo bridge bit, and then after that, you're ready to go, good to go. So today, Sunday night, what have I got on this week that I know of? I know for a fact I've got a Taylor to do a neck reset on, Taylor acoustic, Grand Auditorium, 4 and 4. That's all that's in at the moment, I think. And again, stretch again. Yes, so, but in a way it's sort of good because at the end of the week I'm going to go and drop in on my mum's 81st birthday up in Barnet. Play a few tunes for her in front of people. Ooh. It'll only work if everyone else sings. I'll play the tunes, but everyone's got to sing. So they are sing-along, well-known tunes. That's thankfully most of them. Getting close. That's pretty good. Happy with that as it is. Right, let's just come down here and look at this bridge. We're nearly ready, nearly done I should say. If we go and look at the bridge, down here we have got a bridge that potentially could be, I think it's probably tied down, screwed down too tightly. So I should have maybe upped this beforehand, but I'm just going to back these screws off because they don't want to be pressing down on the front edge of this plate. Now what I'm noticing is that end one doesn't appear to be part of the set. I could be wrong. Okay, so I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to do we'll check the intonation in a minute, but let's just take this off. Okay, dokes. Yes, possibly might be another Adam build in the week, but we'd have to know by tomorrow. Okay, right, this is a little bit wonky, so I'm just going to back this off. It's not critical that it has to be straight, but it's a bit pushed in further than I think it needs to go. And what we really want is, we want this to be able to undo. We want it to tip down without too much force, but obviously we don't want, with guitar playing normally, we don't want it tilting forward, so we have to I think that's quite good. Yes, I rather like that. What I'm going to do, yes, Wilkinson, I can see it there now. Yeah, that's a nice feel. I like that. Now let's get the thing intonated and then we can go. Let's see, can I do this without it touching? We just need it not to touch the... No, I'll have to use it. Oh! Slide, slide, slide. Thank you. Let's do that. Off, on, off. 441 is not what I want. 440. Well intonated from the outset. Happy, 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 happy. Right, replace this. We're good. We are good to go. Wonderful, wonderful. Alrighty. Yeah, so interesting. Those frets had been leveled, so I wonder whether Chris had done any leveling on them or not, or whether it was from the factory. So, because the spec described them as tall, it was very specifically described them as tall. I didn't find them that tall, so I wonder if they'd already been fret leveled at some point in the past. But anyway, and people have various different kind of ideas about what is a tall fret, and sometimes it's people call 1.1, 1.2 tall, and it's not tall in my book. Let's have a look. Oh yes, look at that. Isn't that nice? All good. There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. The Ed O'Brien with sustainer, crazy sustainer. Lovely. Okay, we're good to go. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed that. A little bit different in the functionality, but generally a good Strat with the same requirements for fine-tuning fretwork as any. Well, many other pricey Strats, so there's nothing surprising about that. We keep seeing that happen, you know, again and again. We have expensive Fender models that need a bit of fretwork, but the finish on this is better than some of the ones we've seen recently. For example, some of the Player series, some of the Meteora, or the Meteoras with the terrible frets. This is a nicely done neck. It's a sort of yeah, it's much better than it could have been, even though it has that sort of slightly worn, striated look about it, which you might be able to see if I can bleed and we'll zoom in. Come on. I probably can't see until the light's right. Hold on. Yeah, so it's got a dull string striped. It's been sanded from side to side by something in the past, whether that's you know, wire wool or sandpaper. But it's nicer. It looks better, more played in, and nicer than the Meteora stuff with all that amber goop glooped up the side of it. Anyway, so there we have it. New tusk nut fitted. The right first fret action. Ta-da! Leveled and polished out frets. Bending notes, high bends cleared up. Action reset. Bridge saddles redone. Tremolo lightened. Yeah, there we go. Thanks for watching. See you again.